Just a little pre-introduction, just to let you know that my experiences at the European Women's Individual will be in two parts. So the first part will be dealing with the highlights, the second part's the lowlights, not so good. And I also have a little interesting challenge set in store, so please watch along. Hello and welcome to my vlog. I'm Jovanka Hauska, otherwise known as Jovi. Yeah, this is a little bit of a departure from me, but I am beginning a vlog and I'm going to take you over the course of the year. I'm going to take you along on my chess journey and my chess adventures, and I'm going to be sharing tips and improvement advice, book reviews, basically whatever takes my fancy. For the first of my series, I thought I would talk a little bit about the European Individual Women's Chess Championship that I played in Lara, Turkey, just over Easter. Now, the European Women's Championship is quite an important event, and it's a qualifier for the Women's World Cup. And it was a bit of a topsy-turvy event, and I'm going to be sharing some of the highlights and the lowlights and the nightmares and well, you can see for yourself. I would like to mention my sponsors, Forward Chess. Now, Forward Chess is an interactive ebook reader, and it's a free application that you can download on your iPad. I have a nice big iPad Pro. Great for reading, perhaps not so great for carrying. Phone, you can download it onto your phone, on even your PC and your laptop. And what it does is that you can, once you have downloaded the application onto your device, you can purchase from hundreds and hundreds of books. 13 publishers are there, some independent, so some quite unusual books on sale, and even some in Spanish. What I love about Forward Chess is that every book you purchase is stored in the cloud. And so for someone who mixes devices, Apple, phone, Android, it's very handy that once my book is purchased, it's stored in the cloud, and I can access my book on 4 of my devices. And let's have a look at how Forward Chess appears on my iPad. Now, I have to confess, I've been using Forward Chess for many years now. I actually learned about Forward Chess on the plane from Bergen to Oslo when I was about to play in the Norwegian Chess League. And the thing that appealed to me, it has a very nice, clean interface, and buying books never been easier. And what I like about it is that you can also Marie Kondo your books and create folders. So it's incredibly easy to create a folder. All you have to do is at the top button, there's a click on the plus icon and type away whatever you want to call your book. And it's also very easy to move books. So for instance, I want to go into Caro-Kann, and I decide E4 versus the French Caro-Kann and Philidor. I have to admit, I used that book very heavily when it came to writing my own book, but if it doesn't belong there because it's a mixture, I'm going to remove from library and head back to my books. Very important to click within the device. If you have a back button, I would advise against using those back buttons. Instead, click on the icons within and you can see when you've purchased books, they tend to appear just here like this, and it's very, very easy to move books. So for instance, for instance, one easy one is Gorgiev, Maestro of Practical Studies. I've just bought that book, so I'm going to drag and drop it. I love this, it's like magic. And there you go, and here you can see it has appeared, and there's the front cover, and then you swipe right, and we get to click on the studies 1 to 10, and we can see that is going to cause a thing. And you can actually change the board layout by hitting the first icon on the left, and you can make it small, medium, or large, blue, green, brown, maple, and you can even change the pieces. You can make them into retro. However, I have to confess, more of a classic girl at heart there. So moving back, my books,
And looking at the store, it's very easy to purchase. And you can see that there's Forward Chess sells many books from different publishers. And at the top, you can see the latest books. These are the hot new books covered out. The Modernized French Defense, perhaps that's one for my French collection. And what I like about is that you can click on independence and really discover some real gems. Like one that really appeals to me at the minute is Alekine's Odessa Chess Secrets. I have to admit, I do have a soft spot for chess history and learning about the great one bishop saves the day. Well, that's another one that perhaps I will purchase. And clicking into my books again, my latest purchase was this Keep It Simple E4. And let's go look at the title page, and it covers the open games, the Sicilian defense, and let's have a look at the Caro-Kann. What does it suggest against that? So it suggests the knight c3, d5, knight f3, a very solid system that actually Peter Lecco was playing when he was very young. At that time, people were not impressed that he was playing in such a solid manner, and they asked him, why do you play like this? And you know, there is an attraction to playing with the two bishops, and here d takes e4. And I have to mention now, I'm just going to input the moves because it is in fact an interactive board. So now I'm going to start playing the moves for myself, and I'm going to show you all a little cheap trick that bishop f5 looks like it's the most natural move in the world. Knight g3, bishop g6, and then you just simply go h4 first. And you know, black could look at it and go, well, what's the problem? And go h6. And after knight e5, bishop h7, woohoo! Problems start occurring after queen h5. Yeah, queen d5. It's not going to help anything because bishop c4. And yep, that would be a disaster. And if I wanted to confirm this with Stockfish, what I can like about is that you click on the icon with the clipboard, and you can see a Stockfish is already saying that white is winning. And to remove Stockfish, again, just click on the clipboard and it disappears. And the same goes if you want to remove the board, click on the right-hand icons at the top, and that's the crown. And there you go, it disappears. D takes e4. Bishop g4 is actually what I recommend in my book. And in an earlier book, before it exploded, I actually recommended knight f6, e5, but then knight e4. And then suddenly it absolutely exploded, and it's a very complicated system. What is also it's very much possible with the iPads and with the phone is that once you've purchased the book, and it's actually available for offline access. And so, for instance, Chess People, I can read Shipov's book. Yeah, he's on interesting picture there with a cat wrapped around his shoulders, and I can actually read that book offline. So when I'm on the train, perfect for learning chess on the go. Same can't be said for reading Forward Chess on the computer. If you read it on the computer, then you have to have internet access.
So starting off with the highlights, the tournament started off particularly well for me. I started off with 3.5 points out of 4, which is a great start. And I particularly liked my first round game against Fidan Agassieva. I was white. My first round opponent was a little bit of a tricky opponent. She was tricky in the sense that she had increased in her rating from 2,000 to 2,200 in the course of 2 years. What made her especially tricky was the fact that there were no games on the database. There was one game with this opening, another game with another opening, and the only thing consistent was that in 2006, quite a long time ago, she had played the classical Dutch. So what I did that morning is I went onto my iPad and got up the Forward Chess application and scoured through the ideas. So I had some brief idea of what she would do when if she played the classical Dutch. So the game continued. So she went d4. She could have chosen d5. She could have chosen knight f6. Didn't know. e6, and I thought, whoa, ho, ho, might get a classical Dutch, c4, f5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, and we're into Stonewall territory. Now, I have to say, I love playing against the stone wall. Why do I love playing against the stone wall? Because it gives me the square on e5. And I always remember the words of my old trainer he said to me, it's basically how white uses the e5 square over versus how black will use the e4 square. That's all you need to know. Control the e5 square and then open a line on the queen side. Bob's your uncle. So we'll have a look at how things went. So I'm moving swiftly on and move queen c2 is actually my attempt at mixing things up, because there is always that kind of element when you're playing someone. Have they prepared for you? Bishop d6, bishop f4, and after some thinking, it turns out that no, she hadn't prepared for me, because I've played this system with bishop f4 many times. It's kind of basically built around the repertoire of Mark Hebden, English grandmaster. With castles, bishop takes f4, g takes f4, and here she diverted from an earlier game where my opponent had played queen e8, and she played knight e4, and the game becomes simply that battle of me using the e5 square versus her use of the e4 square. So fast forward on, knight c3, knight d7, knight e2, and I think in this particular position she perhaps misses the easiest route to equality, is b6. She didn't do this, she chose to go knight f6, knight e5, you go back, I go forward, king h8, and now I begin the operation clamp. And now I really like this idea with my pawns on c5, d4 and e3, because the idea is very simple. You're going to open a line via b4, b5. And the open g line, while it looks like it might be a source of counterplay for black, is also, funnily enough, a source of activity for white as well, because you can imagine the situation. The king moves to h1, and then the rook will follow on to g1, and you have pressure on both sides of the board. Obviously not immediately, because after rook king h1, rook g1, I would be doing some form of helpmate, and no one wants to do that. Knight h5, kick back. I can actually just get on with my plan and simply go b4. So knight ef6, bishop d7, a4, queen e7, knight c3, bishop e8. She tries to do a stonewall plan, but this knight on h5 is really not looking so happy. Queen f2, knight d7. Now this is an important thing. Use the e5 square more effectively. The answer is very clear. You just simply, you don't take, because if you don't leave the knight there, you don't take, because for starters that knight on d7 isn't very good. But and also you can see that if I did something like b4, b4, knight takes e5, you can see I haven't really made effective use of over the e5 square. All I've done is increase my control over d6, and that is not a square that I can easily get to with my pieces. So instead I move my knight back, rook f6, rook g1. I was thinking here that she might try rook g6 with the tactical little idea of going knight g3. Unfortunately for her, it doesn't actually do much. So I can go bishop f1, but I can actually just ignore it. After b4, knight g3, I can simply take, rook h6. She can have my bad bishop, and you can see after king g2, I have a nice line to attack on the h line. And the game kind of pretty much continues with, it follows in a kind of model plan for fast forward and bishop, fast forward a few more moves, and you can just see that after move 25, I get b5. I open up my line, and my knight will get back into e5, and look at that control. Now, what was funny about this particular position is that one of my friends asked what the official commentators to give their verdict on this position.
What about this
But it's
position?
completely winning.
Yes.
What white is having? White is a pawn up, and for a compensation is having attack.
Yeah, totally winning.
But white's completely winning, because black's only chance is to mate on a h file, not how to mate with
And
what.
also c6, c7.
Yeah. No, this.
What to do?
I think black can resign this position without danger of losing any sleep.
Now, the highlights continued in round 2, where I was black against Veronika Exler from Austria. When I studied her repertoire, I realized that I was playing against myself. She plays as black, she plays Caracan. As white, she plays fianchetto systems. So how to prepare against someone who is like yourself, you know, plays the same opening as you. And so I decided that I would play in the most provocative way possible. And I chose to play the semi-Slav, because with the idea that the fianchetto systems are actually rather dangerous for both white and black. White will lose a pawn, and it's not entirely clear how that pawn will be recaptured, but at the same time white does get a lot of pressure, and black has to be prepared to grind it out. And she chose, true enough, she chose g3 on move 4. Things can get like this. This is the petition I was talking of. If white plays g3 on move 5, then I can grab the pawn and I hold on to it and I suffer, but it's a pawn. But she played g3 on move 4, and I continued in a very provocative way with bishop g4. And this is actually following a recommendation by the Austrian Grandmaster Markus Rager. And he recommended this line. And at first when I watched it, I thought this is just dubious, because it's so provocative and there's so many pitfalls for black. For instance, after knight e5, bishop f5, white's main point is that after c takes d5, queen takes d5, which looks very natural, is actually really bad because of f3. And bishop takes b1, rook takes b1, and then you have e4 coming. You know, you don't worry about the pawn on a2, you just get this wonderful, wonderful sense. Plays c takes d5, and knight c3, knight c6, and again, pitfall number 2 for black. If you were to go e6, then g4, bishop g6, h4 is also rather unpleasant, because black is forced to go h6, knight takes g6, f takes g6, and look at that pawn structure on the king side. It is horrible, horrible, horrible. So the natural e6 would be a terrible move. Instead, black should play a waiting move with rook c8 and g4. What is a little bit more natural is that white plays bishop g2, with the idea of perhaps not just going g4, but perhaps more preparing e4, and in which case black should prepare for this and go bishop g6. Instead, my opponent, you know, carried on rather aggressively with g4, bishop d7, and knight takes d7. I wasn't really afraid of her playing g5, because this is the trump. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, knight goes to h5, queen takes d5, e6, and you get a lot of play for the 2 pawns. I played knight takes d7, and I played knight takes d7. So the idea behind it, there's a little bit of a cheap trap, and that is after knight takes d5, you can just go e6, and you're threatening queen h4 check. So if the knight goes back to c3, queen h4 check. And she played bishop e3, and here I had a long think, because bishop e3 is a rather unorthodox placing of the bishop. You would expect it to go to f4, you would perhaps expect d2. I understand the reasoning. The understanding was to go bishop e3 and then f2, and then commence action in the center. But yeah, it's chess is timing. And so I spent a long time thinking, do I do it? Do I play in a very aggressive manner? I was perhaps inspired, so I decided, let's just do it. e5, knight takes d5, queen a5 check, knight c3 takes, bishop takes, knight takes d4, and now I have all the dark squares, and bishop e7 and castles. In fact, I did think during the game, I thought, well, what happens if she goes h4? with the idea that because my threat is to go bishop g5, and well, that's the best defense. Bishop e7, castles, and then a simply castle. And after queen takes d7, I did consider rook takes c3, but I think I have the most simplest to go rook f to d8, queen takes e7, and now rook takes c3, and that would be game over. So bishop e7, castles, king b1, desperately trying to get the king to safety, knight b6, g5, and at this stage my opponent was really using a lot of time, and here she was just playing with seconds, so it was just, here you just see her panicking while she tries to control my activity, which she just cannot, because these guys, in the famous words of Tal, are just sleeping. Rook takes rook, knight takes d1, and queen d2, and although the game carried on for a few more moves. So in round 4, I was facing Kayela Abdullah from Azerbaijan, my second Azeri player. I didn't quite know what to expect. She's a very aggressive player, very dynamic, and this time I was playing her facing black, and she responded with the pan off, which was a little bit of a surprise. So I'm just going to mention this in passing. So she played the opening stage up to move 6, very confident. In my book, in my 2014 book, I recommend a very solid approach with e6. But in recent times, I have developed a little bit of a fondness for the really wacky knight e4 line. And it's crazy. It's not really clear what's happening. It's it's a kind of a roll the dice kind of opening. So knight takes e4, d takes e4, and d5, knight e5, queen d4, and the idea is utterly bizarre, and I love it. You know, it's f6. So if you go queen takes e4, queen b6, castles, and then this is the point. You get greedy and you go queen takes f2, e3. You have bishop f5, and the situation is crazy. It's wacky. It's wonderful. And yeah, but I chose, because she was playing so confidently, I played my book recommendation, which is actually something which I don't play too often. I have it as a reserve. So e6, and here she paused for thought, and she didn't know her theory, so she recaptured the pawn, and then the position becomes very, very symmetrical. And I'm going to fast forward and to the following position, knight takes move 15, and she's just responded knight takes e4, and I really should be playing. And the point is that knight d6 isn't that great because of king f8, and after castles we have rook d8, and black stands well. So I should have been doing that, but I be honest with you, because that's the name of the game, I'm going to be as honest as I possibly can. I did not really anticipate bishop takes d4, knight d6. I was too busy working out what would happen after queen b4, and instead I chose to roll the dice with castles, queenside, and knight takes f6, g takes f6. So the idea is I will win the pawn on d4. There's no question about that. But I have absolutely ruined my kingside pawns. Look at that, h6, f6, f7. This is the worst pawn structure you could probably find on the board at any point. As compensation, in this particular position, I have a lot of play down this d line. So I thought, as long as I have that, as long as I keep all the pieces on the board, I will have enough pressure to make her life a little bit difficult. And queen f3, king b8, I tried to get my king into safety. You always have to consider king safety. And these kind of, I call them heavy piece endings, or rather middle games or endings, it's your choice. What is really, really important here is king safety and piece activity. So if you have king safety, then you stand quite well. So she in fact has king safety, but she does not have piece activity. If she did have piece activity, then she would be standing a lot better. So she goes about mobilizing her pieces, and I try to balance out the equilibrium by putting my rooks in the center and mobilizing as much as possible. So rook c8, queen d6, queen e3, rook d2. So I felt very, very comfortable here. Rook b8, rook b3, sorry. And it's around about here that I start to go wrong. So far my black rook started on d2. My queen is well placed on d6 and my rook is okay on d8. It's doing a nice support, it's got the supporting role. It has to be done. So I probably should be going h5, perhaps even with the idea of h4 and thinking about setting a target on g2. Instead, I lose the control and I start to play queen e5, queen f3, and I should be doing, I ended up playing rook, second rook, my pride and joy, all the way down to d7. Now if you look at this, look at these two rooks. I have made my rooks incredibly passive. It's fail. Bad decision. So of course I should be going rook 8 d7, which was my intention, but I was worried about rook de3, queen d6, and somehow my king getting caught in some of the action. And it's yeah, rook e8, rook d8, rook takes d8, and I think, yeah, queen f4, king 8, queen takes h6. It's not impressive play by me. So rook c1, and you can see a6. It really is not great. She plays fantastic. Rook c6, rook d1, king h2, and now I went rook 8 d7. And here I was saved by a big blunder because she played rook takes a6. In fact, after rook c b6, I think I would be almost on the verge of losing. But she played rook takes a6 and queen e1. And there is, in fact, a way to draw here. If you can pause your computer for a little bit and have a think about how you would save the game. So my idea is clear. She can't go because of queen g1 check, king h3, and queen f1. And I pick up the rook on a6. Thank you very much. That's my plan. Have a think. In fact, the correct move is to play queen f4, rook c7, and now you play the stunning rook takes b7, king takes b7, and wait for it, it really is very beautiful. Rook a7, check, sacrificing another rook, temporarily anyway, and king takes a7, queen takes c7, and the king just cannot escape. She played rook takes b7 check immediately, and this time I get the opportunity to capture the rook with my rook. And after queen b4, rook c7, rook b6, king c8, queen takes f5, rook d7. And funny enough, I would say that this position is still very, very tricky for me. And it's tricky because my king has got no cover. It has two rooks. I mean, I'm a rook up, but I simply have no cover for my king. Since the best move in this position is probably just to go b4, and then you have ideas of going b5, and still, you know, rook h8 is in the air. I can't be greedy with queen takes a2 because of rook h8, and then that would be curtains for me. Yeah. So yeah, but we were in time trouble here, and after rook h8, she allowed me to win back some material, and even better, swap off a set of rooks. And here you come, and move 42. And so now it's just a question of taking your time, guarding your king from the checks, and using that extra material. Now, moving on to game 7. So this was played after, obviously, games 5 and 6, which were a little bit unfortunate, as we will soon find out. In particular, game 6 was a bit of a nightmare. But so I was eager to come back. So we're gonna join the game on move 6, and I played something I haven't really played before, but I had decided to experiment. I played move rook e1 with the idea of going e2, e4. Now the reason I'm kind of pointing out this is I've been experimenting a little bit with memory techniques, and I decided to have two model games in this rook e1 variation. One game was by Artem Temyov in the World Team Championships, and the other game was Aronian versus Rapport in Gibraltar last year. What I did to remember these games, I thought was a bit unusual, and I thought I might share it, might be handy, but I decided to spin a story. I kind of composed a little narrative. And so the game, this is following both games, knight c3, rook e8, so far so good, knight h3 and b6, and here it started my narrative. And the narrative was, you want to close that bishop down. You want to make that bishop bad. So both games continued with d5, bishop b7, and now Aronian played a4 just to soften up the queen side. And you know, you're threatening a5, and here black responded a6 because he's going to play they're going to play b5. And now the next maneuver was composed by Artemiev. And here I composed the story that is very, very, very important to encourage black to play h7, h6. So this is why Artemiev played bishop g5, h6, bishop e3, and queen e7, queen d2, and king h7. And now I nicknamed this knight the King's Indian attack knight, because in the King's Indian attack the knight normally comes to d2, then it comes to f1, finds itself on h2, ready to strike on g4. So we kind of, the plan is exactly the same. The knight on f3 has gone to h2 to go to g4 to target h6. And the whole idea is, if the knights get exchanged, so for instance you play rook c8 or something, the knight gets exchanged. After knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, we have an open h-line to attack that weak point on h6. Now, when I say compose a narrative, I imagine the audience, you know, throwing flowers and saying, "Well done, Artemiev, well done." And another story that I composed with Levon Aronian, because that game, Aronian rapport, continued in a different way. Their rapport kind of focused on the queen side and getting a knight to c5. So in that game, instead of queen e7, rapport played knight to c5, forcing knight d2, and then the game kind of went on the queen side. And one thing that I noticed there was, again, Aronian was not too proud to move his rook from e1 to f1. Going back to my game, after queen e7, I continued with the Artemiev plan, and now my opponent reacted with queen f8, which I thought was a little bit passive. I decided to enact the Aronian idea. I'm not too proud to move my rook from e1 back to f1. So I thought, you know, rooks love to be opposite queens. Rook f1, rook ac8, and then I put the Artemiev plan into action, knight g4, knight g8, and I opened up the line. And the game proceeded very smoothly, so I had a nice little intermediate move after h5. I could play rook af1 and threatening rook takes f7. So of course, if she takes, pawn takes knight on g4. I don't capture the pawn, obviously. I just go rook takes f7, and the queen is looking very sorry on f8. So she did not allow that, of course, rook e7. So the question is how to continue. So after bishop e5, that's why I played rook f3. Queen g7, and I like this next move. Whenever I tell my students to go king hunting, I tell them you should open up lines. So you either open up lines with pawns or you sacrifice material. Why do you open up lines? So the big guys, and by the big guys I mean the queen and the rooks, can break through. So that's why I played g4, and I love pawn breaks. I'm not going to make a secret of that. Love pawn breaks. And now she played knight c5. And I got very enthusiastic because I played g takes h5 and b takes c3, b takes c3. I actually had the very nice intermediate move h takes g6, which was actually better. F takes g6 and now b takes c3. And the idea is that after knight takes c4, I can go queen e1. But I was a little bit focused on this little cheap trap that I had set up, so I didn't quite see that continuation. The cheap trap I set up was after b takes c3, knight takes c4, queen d3, and after knight c5, I'm going to pause the video for a little bit and give you time to think. And last chance before I continue to hit pause. Okay, so the answer is of course bishop takes c5, b takes c5, and now you have of course the wonderful rook takes f7, because rook takes f7 will lose to h takes g6 check, and after queen takes g6, knight takes rook takes f7 wins the game. Unfortunately, my opponent spotted. It's always a little bit sad, but okay. And then this is why I go h takes g6, and instead I rook f4. I'm a little bit. If I were to look back on this game, I would say I spoiled this moment a little bit, simply by not being systematic enough. In very sharp positions, you should always calculate the checks, the captures, the attacks, and in middle games you also look at pawn breaks. But you really have to be systematic. You have to be disciplined, so that and the way to get there is just by practice. So you run through, you make a list of options, and then you choose which option you like best, and then you start calculating. And yeah, and I didn't practice what I preached, and I simply just went h takes g6, and after queen takes g6, again rook f4 is a good choice, but I played knight g4, bringing a new piece into attack, and after rook f8 I realized, oh, it's not that easy for me. So I really dug deep here, and I dug deep, and I came up with the idea that, okay, I have to bring in the f rook to attack. You know, there's an open g line, let's use it. And this is why I played king h2, to get the king out of the way and to open up the g line for use. And after f4, rook f4, rook g1, here it comes, and queen h5, and knight f2, getting rid of that wonderful knight on e4. The knight takes f2. I breathed a big sigh of relief, because I knew the job was much easier now. Bishop takes f2, and now the threat is very unpleasant. Rook h4, and knight h6, rook h4, queen e8, and it's just a case now of bringing the piece that's not working into the attack, and that's bishop f3, rook f6, bishop a, yep, bishop e3. c4 I didn't quite see, but then I just then once I kind of regained my composure, I just thought, well, let's just take after knight f7, bishop takes f7, and rook h4 is coming with deadly effect.